The desert wind howled like a wounded animal, carrying the faint cry of a child through the empty streets of a forgotten border town. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour where shadows stretched long and unforgiving under the sodium glow of a single flickering street lamp. There, huddled against the peeling wall of an abandoned gas station, was a little girl, no older than 7. Her dress was torn at the hem, smudged with dirt and what looked like traces of a struggle. Tears carved clean paths down her dust-streaked cheeks as she clutched a ragged stuffed bear, whispering to it as if it were her only confidant. "They hit my dad," she murmured, her voice breaking like fragile glass. "They hit him so hard, and now he's not moving." The town of Dusthaven wasn't much more than a speck on the map, a place where rusted pickups outnumbered people, and the air always smelled of sun-baked asphalt and regret. No one had heard the commotion earlier that evening. The sharp crack of fists on flesh, the thud of a body hitting the gravel outside the local diner. The girl's father, a quiet mechanic named Harlan, had crossed the wrong shadows. He ran a small garage on the edge of town, fixing rigs for truckers who passed through without a second glance. But tonight, a group of roughnecks, locals with ties to a smuggling ring that bled the town dry, had cornered him over a debt he couldn't pay. They'd left him crumpled in the alley, his breaths shallow, his face a map of bruises. The girl, Lily, had hidden in the back seat of their old sedan, watching it all through the grimy window, too terrified to scream. Footsteps echoed faintly in the distance, but they weren't coming to help. The men who'd done this were still out there, laughing it off in a dimly lit bar a block away, their boots heavy with the weight of unchecked power. Lily's whispers grew frantic, her small hands trembling as she rocked back and forth. The world felt too big, too cruel for someone so young. She didn't know her father's old friend, the one he'd mentioned in stories around the dinner table, a man from his army days, bound by a promise made under fire in some distant war. Harlan had saved that man's life once, pulling him from a burning Humvee as bullets rained down. In return, he'd extracted a vow: "If I ever need you, brother, you ride." But promises like that faded with time, buried under the scars of survival. The low rumble started as a vibration in the earth, like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Headlights pierced the darkness first, dozens of them, slicing through the night like knives. A convoy of motorcycles crested the hill on the outskirts of Dusthaven, their engines snarling in unison, a symphony of chrome and fury. 52 strong, they were the Iron Vipers, a chapter of riders who traded battlefield fatigues for leather vests etched with skulls and crossed pistons. At their head rode Ethan Ghost Harlan, no relation to the mechanic, but fate had a way of weaving threads like that. Ethan was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his face weathered by sun and sorrow, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw like a reminder of the explosion that had ended his military career. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the road ahead as he led the pack, the wind whipping at his salt-and-pepper beard. They weren't supposed to be here. Ethan had been nursing a beer in a roadside dive 200 miles north, trying to drown the ghosts that haunted him, the wife who'd left after his discharge, the son lost to an overdose born of his own absences. The call had come at 2:47 a.m., jolting him from a fitful sleep in his motel room. It was Harlan's number, but the voice on the other end was a stranger's, Lily's, barely audible over the line, her words a desperate plea. "Uncle Ethan, Daddy said to call you." They hurt him. The name hit like a gut punch. Harlan, the brother he'd sworn to protect. Ethan hadn't spoken to him in years, but that promise echoed louder than the years of silence. He hung up, grabbed his keys, and within minutes, his phone was blowing up with texts to the crew. "Ride south now, brothers down." Loyalty like theirs didn't need explanations. It was forged in blood and revived by a single word. The bikes slowed as they entered town, the roar fading to a growl that made windows rattle. Ethan spotted her first, the tiny figure by the gas station, illuminated like a beacon in the gloom. He killed his engine and dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel as the rest of the Vipers fanned out behind him, a wall of leather and resolve. Lily froze, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fragile hope as the giant of a man approached, his shadow engulfing her. He knelt slowly, removing his helmet to reveal eyes softened by the sight of her innocence. "Hey, little one," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "I'm Ethan, your dad. He called me. Where is he?" She pointed a trembling finger toward the alley behind the diner, her whisper barely carrying over the idling engines. "They took him inside. Said he'd pay." Ethan's jaw tightened, the old rage stirring beneath his calm exterior. He glanced back at his crew, men and women who'd each carried their own burdens. Jax, the ex-cop haunted by a badge he couldn't trust. Maria, a nurse who'd patched up too many roadside victims, and the others, veterans all, bound by the unspoken code of the road. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. Ethan placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You stay with Maria here. We're going to bring him home." As the first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, the Vipers moved like a shadow army. The bar's neon sign buzzed mockingly, but inside the air grew thick with tension. The roughnecks looked up from their drinks, smirks fading as the door burst open. Ethan stepped in first, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "Where's Harlan?" he demanded, his tone even but laced with steel. The leader of the group, a burly man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, laughed nervously. "Who's asking? This ain't your business, biker." But Ethan didn't raise a fist. He didn't need to. The weight of 52 souls at his back spoke volumes, the quiet power of men and women who'd stared down worse than small-town thugs. "It is now," he replied, his eyes locking on the back room where faint groans echoed. "We ride for our own." Lily watched from the window of a Viper's bike, clutching her bear tighter as the first hints of justice unfolded. This promise, long buried, was rising like the sun, ready to burn away the darkness that had touched her world. And in that moment, as engines revved once more, Ethan felt the scars of his past loosen their grip. For Harlan, for the girl, for the family they'd chosen on the open road. The bar's air hung heavy with the stench of stale beer and cigarette smoke, the kind that clung to clothes like a bad memory. Dim bulbs swung lazily from the ceiling, casting jagged shadows across scarred wooden tables where the roughnecks sat, their laughter dying like embers under a boot heel. Ethan stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the first light of dawn that filtered through the grimy windows. Behind him, the Iron Vipers formed an unyielding line. 52 riders, their vests patched with the insignia of crossed pistons and a coiled serpent, eyes steady and unblinking. No one moved for weapons. This wasn't about bullets or blades. It was about the weight of presence, the silent thunder of loyalty that could shatter illusions of power. The snake-tattooed leader, a man called Vance, with a face like weathered leather, pushed back from his stool, his chair scraping against the floorboards. He eyed Ethan with a mix of bravado and unease, fingers twitching toward a half-empty glass. "You got no claim here, stranger," Vance snarled, his voice gravelly from years of barked orders in dimly lit backrooms. "Harlan owed us. Simple as that. Town business." But his words faltered as Jack stepped forward, the ex-cop's badge long discarded, but his stance still carrying the echo of authority. Jax's eyes, shadowed by the brim of his faded cap, scanned the room, noting the nervous glances exchanged among the group. 5 men in total, their hands calloused from more than honest labor. Ethan didn't flinch. He could feel the pulse of the road in his veins, the same rhythm that had carried him through desert patrols and midnight runs. Harlan's face flashed in his mind, not the broken man in the alley, but the young soldier who dragged him from that inferno years ago, flames licking at their heels as the Humvee twisted in the sand. "Brother," Harlan had gasped back then, blood streaking his uniform, "you pull me out next time." They'd sealed it with a clasp of hands, a promise etched deeper than ink. Time had eroded the edges, but not the core. Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a knife through fog. He's family, and family doesn't pay debts to snakes. From the back room, a muffled groan pierced the standoff, pulling everyone's gaze. Lily's father lay there, slumped against a stack of crates, his breaths ragged, traces of a harsh encounter marking his arms and face. He'd tried to stand when they dragged him in, but weakness had won, leaving him to stare at the ceiling with eyes glazed by pain and defiance. The girl had seen enough from her hiding spot earlier, enough to know these men weren't done. Vance followed the sound, his smirk twisting into something uglier. "You want him? Fine, but it'll cost you. Walk away now, or we make this messy." Maria, the nurse with steady hands that had mended countless wounds on rain-slicked highways, knelt outside by Lily, her voice a soft anchor amid the idling engines. "He's coming back, sweetheart," she murmured, wrapping a spare jacket around the girl's shoulders. The fabric smelled of leather and faint motor oil, a scent that promised safety in its familiarity. Lily nodded, her small fingers twisting the bear's ear, but her eyes stayed fixed on the bar's door. Inside, the air thickened further as one of the roughnecks, a wiry man with a scar across his knuckles, lunged to his feet, knocking over a bottle that shattered like brittle bones. "You think your little club scares us?" he spat, advancing a step. Ethan raised a hand, halting his crew without a word. This wasn't the war they'd left behind. It was a different battlefield, one fought with words and will. He stepped closer, his boots echoing deliberately on the worn floor. "We don't want trouble, just Harlan, and whatever truth you owe this town." His gaze swept the room, landing on a faded poster tacked to the wall, a generic call for community watch, its edges curling like forgotten ideals. Vance hesitated, the bluster cracking under the pressure of those unyielding stares. The Vipers weren't invaders, they were guardians, riders who'd chosen the road over resentment, binding their scars into something unbreakable. Jax moved then, his voice calm, but edged with the authority of someone who'd seen corruption fester from the inside. "I've got friends in places that matter. One call, and this town business turns into questions none of you want." It was a bluff, wrapped in truth, his old contacts, the ones he'd walked away from after a badge turned sour. The wiry man faltered, glancing at Vance for direction. Outside, the dawn light strengthened, gilding the motorcycles in a warm glow that contrasted the chill inside. Engines ticked as they cooled, a subtle reminder of the convoy's readiness to roll, to carry justice on leather-clad backs. Vance's shoulders slumped, the fight leaching from him like air from a punctured tire. He jerked his head toward the back. "Get him, but don't come back." It wasn't surrender, not fully, just the retreat of a bully facing a mirror to his own frailty. Ethan nodded once, striding past without touch or threat. In the dim room, Harlan stirred at the sound of boots, his eyes focusing through the haze. "Ethan!" he rasped, recognition dawning like sunlight on rusted chrome. Ethan knelt, offering a hand that Harlan gripped weakly. "Promised I'd ride," Ethan said simply, helping him to his feet. The mechanic leaned heavily, but there was steel in his frame, the kind forged in shared fire. As they emerged into the bar's main space, the roughnecks parted like mist, their eyes averted. No blows landed, no chaos erupted, just the quiet victory of honor prevailing over greed. Lily slipped from Maria's side, running to her father with a cry that echoed off the buildings. Harlan scooped her up, burying his face in her hair, the family whole again under the watchful eyes of the Vipers. Ethan watched, a knot loosening in his chest, the old ghosts retreating a step, but as the crew mounted up, engines rumbling back to life, Jax pulled him aside. "This ain't over. Those snakes have roots deeper than Dusthaven. Smugglers, maybe worse. Harlan's garage." It was just the start. The convoy formed up, dust swirling in the morning air as they prepared to escort Harlan and Lily north, away from the shadows. Ethan climbed onto his bike, the familiar vibration grounding him. The promise had been kept, but new ones stirred. To protect this fragile circle, to root out the corruption that preyed on the forgotten. As the first bike peeled out, tires gripping the gravel with purpose, the sun broke fully over the horizon, casting long shadows that fled before the light. In that ride, Ethan felt the road calling not just for escape, but for reckoning. The family chosen had grown by two, and with it the weight of their shared vow. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert road into a ribbon of shimmering heat that danced like a mirage ahead of the convoy. 52 motorcycles thrummed in tight formation, their engines a steady growl that drowned out the whispers of wind through the scrub brush lining the highway. Ethan rode point, his broad back a silhouette against the glare. Harlan's old sedan tucked in the middle, like a fragile heart guarded by steel wings. Lily sat in the passenger seat beside her father, her small hand in his, the stuffed bear wedged between them as if it could ward off the lingering shadows of the night. Harlan's face was pale, etched with lines of exhaustion, but his grip on the wheel was firm, the sedan keeping pace with the bike's disciplined rhythm. Miles slipped by in a haze of dust and diesel fumes, the air thick with the scent of sun-warmed leather and the faint metallic tang of exhaust. Ethan glanced in his rearview mirror, catching sight of Maria riding shotgun on Jax's bike, her dark hair whipping like a banner of resolve. She'd checked Harlan's wounds back at the bar, superficial marks from the rough handling, nothing that wouldn't heal with time and rest. But her eyes had held a deeper concern, the kind born from patching up lives frayed by hidden threats. The Vipers had formed this escort not just for the ride, but for the unspoken pact. No one left behind, no debt unpaid. Ethan's mind wandered to the promise that had pulled him south, Harlan's voice from years ago echoing over the roar. "We watch each other's backs, Ghost. Always." The nickname had stuck from their army days, a nod to how Ethan moved through chaos like a spectre, unseen until it was too late for the enemy. They pulled off at a roadside outpost an hour north of Dusthaven, a cluster of weathered pumps and a diner that looked like it had been pieced together from spare parts. The sign creaked in the breeze, sagebrush stop, fuel and fixes. Engines quieted to ticks and sighs as the crew dismounted, forming a loose perimeter around the sedan. Harlan eased out, wincing as he stretched, Lily clinging to his leg like a shadow. "Thanks," he said to Ethan, his voice rough but steady, clapping a hand on the biker's shoulder. The touch carried the weight of brotherhood, a bridge over the chasm of lost years. Ethan nodded, his scar pulling tight as he smiled faintly. "Water under the bridge, brother. But we need to talk about those snakes back there." Inside the diner, the air was cooler, laced with the aroma of fresh coffee brewing behind a scarred counter. A few locals, truckers with calloused hands and wary eyes, glanced up from their plates, but the Viper's presence turned curiosity to discretion. They claimed a corner booth, Harlan sliding in with Lily on his lap, while Ethan, Jax and Maria took the facing seats. The vinyl creaked under their weight, a small sound swallowed by the hum of an ancient ceiling fan. Jax leaned forward, his ex-cop instincts sharpening his words. "Vance and his crew aren't just local muscle. Harlan, you said something about your garage, debts from parts you couldn't source." Harlan nodded, his fingers tracing absent patterns on the table, avoiding Lily's gaze. "Smugglers. They run goods through the border routes, use spots like Dusthaven as way stations. I fixed their rigs for cheap, thought it was just hauling freight. but when I pushed back on a job that felt wrong, too heavy, too quiet, they came calling. Lily fidgeted, her whisper cutting through the tension like a thread of light. Daddy said no to the bad boxes. Her words hung there, innocent but loaded, drawing a collective breath from the table. Ethan's jaw set, the pieces clicking into place. This wasn't a one-off shakedown. It was a thread in a larger web, one that preyed on towns like Dusthaven, twisting honest work into chains. He'd seen it before, in the war zones where corruption festered like an open wound. And later on, the roads where riders like him crossed paths with shadows that never quite faded. Maria reached across, squeezing Lily's hand gently. "You're brave for telling us, kiddo. Braver than most grown folks." The girl's eyes, wide and trusting, met hers, a spark of family forming in that simple exchange. Outside, the crew milled about, checking tires and sharing quiet words, their vests catching the light like armor forged from conviction. One rider, a veteran named Samuel with a limp from an old IED, leaned against his bike, scanning the horizon. "Feels like we're stirring a hornet's nest," he muttered to another Tyler, whose quick hands had once disarmed traps in far-off sands. Tyler nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "But that's why we ride. Hornets don't scare us." Their bond was the quiet kind, built on nods and shared silences, the family chosen when blood ties proved too brittle. Back in the booth, Jax pulled out a worn notebook, sketching a rough map from memory. Routes he'd patrolled in his badge days, now twisted by darker currents. "If they're smuggling, it's bigger than Vance. Ties to outfits that buy off sheriffs, silence witnesses. We got Harlan out, but if they know about the call..." His voice trailed, the implication clear. Ethan stared out the window, watching dust devils swirl in the distance, mirrors to the turmoil inside him. The scars of his past, the explosion that stole his hearing in one ear, the family that slipped away in the aftermath, had taught him isolation's cost. But this ride, this promise revived, was mending something deeper. "We don't run," he said finally, his tone like gravel under tires. "We follow the thread. Get Harlan and Lily safe, then circle back. Expose it." Harlan looked up, gratitude mixing with resolve in his eyes. "I never asked for this mess to touch you, Ghost. But yeah, for her." He ruffled Lily's hair, and she leaned into him, the bear forgotten for a moment. Maria stood, signaling the waitress for refills, her movements efficient, an anchor in the storm. As the coffee arrived, steaming and black, the group mapped a plan: head to a safe house 2 hours north, a Viper outpost disguised as a mechanic's shop. From there, reach out to old contacts, the ones who dealt in truths rather than threats. But as they rose to leave, a low rumble echoed from the south, not thunder but engines, distant yet closing. Ethan froze at the door, his hand instinctively going to his side, though no weapon rested there. Through the heat haze, shapes emerged on the horizon, a trio of blacked-out trucks kicking up gravel like angry spirits. Jax cursed under his breath. "Reinforcements! They must have tailed us." The diner fell silent, the locals edging away as the Vipers reformed outside, a wall of determination against the approaching dust cloud. Lily's hand tightened in Harlan's, her whisper barely audible over the rising growl. "They're coming back." Ethan mounted his bike, the key turning with a decisive click, his crew falling in behind. This wasn't the end of the rescue. It was the beginning of the ride that would test every vow they'd ever made. The sun beat down mercilessly, but in their eyes burned a fiercer light, the unyielding fire of loyalty, ready to illuminate the darkness ahead. As the trucks drew nearer, engines revving in challenge, the convoy prepared to meet them not with fury, but with the unbreakable chain of chosen kin. The road stretched on, demanding everything, and they were willing to give it. The dust cloud swelled like a storm front on the horizon, the blacked-out trucks barreling down the highway with a roar that vibrated through the asphalt. Ethan felt it in his chest first, a deep, ominous thrum that matched the quickening pulse of his crew. The sagebrush stops pumps gleamed under the midday sun, their metal surfaces hot to the touch as the iron vipers snapped into position. Bikes formed a ragged semicircle around the sedan, engines idling with a low menace, while Harlan scooped Lily into his arms, her small body tensing against him. The girl's eyes, wide as saucers, fixed on the approaching vehicles, her whisper lost in the wind. "Daddy, they're fast." Maria moved like a shadow, guiding Harlan toward the diner's side entrance, her hand firm on his elbow. "Get her inside. Lock the door," she urged, her voice steady despite the flicker of concern in her eyes. She'd seen standoffs like this before, roadside ambushes born of grudges that festered in the cracks of forgotten towns. Jax flanked her, his notebook tucked away, now replaced by the quiet authority of his stance, feet planted wide on the gravel. The ex-cop's mind raced through scenarios, calculating angles and exits, the old instincts a double-edged blade that had cost him his badge once. "3 trucks, maybe 8 men," he muttered to Ethan, squinting against the glare. "They're not here for talk." Ethan nodded, his gloved hands flexing on the handlebars of his bike. The scar along his jaw pulled tight as he scanned the road, the air thick with the scent of heated rubber and impending rain that hung just beyond the heat. This wasn't Dust Haven's back alley scuffle. It was the web tightening, Vance's roots reaching out like thorns to snag what they'd claimed. The promise to Harlan burned brighter now, not just a rescue but a shield for the fragile life beside him, Lily, with her innocent trust, and the father who'd carried their shared vow through years of silence. Ethan's own ghost stirred, memories of patrols where hesitation meant loss, but he pushed them down, focusing on the now. 52 riders, a family forged in fire, ready to stand as one. The lead truck skidded to a halt 20 yards out, its tires screeching a warning that scattered pebbles like shrapnel. 2 more flanked it, doors creaking open to reveal figures in faded denim and shadowed faces. Hardened men with the same predatory glint as Vance's crew, their vehicles marked by the subtle dents of rough border runs. The driver of the first, a stocky man with a bandana pulled low, stepped out first, his boots kicking up dust that swirled around his ankles. "You think you can just ride off with our collateral?" he bellowed, his voice carrying over the engines like a challenge thrown into the wind. Behind him, the others fanned out, hands hovering near pockets, the tension coiling like a spring in the midday heat. No one from the Vipers answered with shouts. Samuel, the veteran with the limp, eased off his bike, his movements deliberate, positioning himself to cover the diner's flank. Tyler revved his engine once, a sharp bark that echoed the group's resolve, but Ethan raised a fist, signaling restraint. This road was their domain, won through miles of sweat and sacrifice, and they wouldn't let it devolve into chaos. "We're taking Harlan and the girl north," Ethan called out, his tone even, carrying the weight of unyielding calm. "Your business with him ends here. Walk away, and no lines get crossed." The bandana man laughed, a harsh sound that grated like sand in gears, but his eyes darted to the wall of riders, noting the women's steady gazes and the men's unblinking focus. These weren't outlaws chasing thrills. They were guardians, bound by codes deeper than the law's shallow reach. One of the smugglers shifted, a wiry figure with tattoos peeking from his sleeve, glancing back at the trucks as if weighing the odds. Inside the diner, through the grease-streaked window, Lily pressed her face to the glass, Harlan's arm around her shoulders, his free hand clenched into a fist. The air inside was still, heavy with the aroma of cooling coffee and unspoken fears. But his resolve mirrored Ethan's, a father's quiet fury, tempered by the need to protect. Jack stepped forward then, bridging the gap with words honed from years of interrogations gone wrong. "We know about the roots. The bad boxes that twist good men into ghosts. Harlan's out, and if you push this, it unravels everything." His voice wove through the standoff, planting seeds of doubt, the ethical blade sharper than any threat. The bandana man faltered, his bravado cracking as whispers rippled through his group, names of contacts, risks of exposure, the corruption that bound them like invisible chains. The sun beat down, turning the scene into a tableau of sweat-slicked tension, shadows shortening as noon approached. One of the smugglers broke ranks, tossing a radio back into the truck cab with a curse. "Vance said bring 'em back quiet," he grumbled to his leader, loud enough for the Vipers to hear. The admission hung there, a thread pulled loose, revealing the larger tangle. Not just debts, but a network preying on border towns, silencing voices like Harlan's with intimidation wrapped in shadows. Ethan's mind flashed to the girl's plea on the phone, her tiny voice cutting through the night, igniting this ride. Redemption wasn't in vengeance. It was in this moment, standing firm, forcing the darkness to retreat without a drop of blood spilled. The bandana man spat into the dust, his shoulders slumping under the collective weight of 52 stairs. "This ain't worth the heat," he growled, signaling his men to pile back into the trucks. Engines coughed to life, gravel crunching as they wheeled around in a wide arc, the dust cloud retreating south like a defeated spectre. The Vipers held their ground until the taillights faded into the haze, the air settling into a fragile peace, broken only by the distant call of a hawk wheeling overhead. Ethan exhaled slowly, the knot in his chest easing as he dismounted, striding to the diner door. Harlan emerged, Lily in tow, her face lighting with relief as she ran to Maria, who knelt with open arms. "It's okay now," Maria soothed, the nurse's touch a balm against the fear. Harlan met Ethan's gaze, a nod passing between them. Brothers in the truest sense, their promise evolving into something unbreakable. "They'll come again," Harlan said quietly, his voice laced with the weariness of a man who'd seen too much. Ethan clapped his shoulder, the gesture firm. "Then we ride again, for all of us." The convoy reformed, bikes roaring back to life as they pulled onto the highway, the sedan once more in the protective fold. The road unspooled ahead, a vein of asphalt carrying them toward the safe house. But the encounter lingered like exhaust in the air, a reminder that justice was a journey, not a destination. Ethan's scar itched under the sun, an old wound talking, but for the first time in years it felt like progress. The family chosen pressed on, their loyalty a light piercing the gathering clouds, ready for whatever shadows lay in wait. If this tale of unbreakable bonds is stirring something in you, give it a like to help spread the word. Your support keeps these stories riding strong. The asphalt blurred beneath the convoy's tires as they cut through the afternoon haze, the desert landscape unfolding like an endless scroll of sun-bleached earth and jagged mesas. Ethan's bike led the pack, its engine a steady heartbeat that synced with the rhythm of the road, while Harlan's sedan hummed in the center, shielded by the flanking riders. Lily had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder, her breaths soft and even. The stuffed bear clutched like a talisman in her lap. The air rushed past, carrying the sharp tang of sagebrush and the faint, acrid whisper of distant rain clouds gathering on the horizon. Ethan felt the weight of the morning standoff settle into his bones, not as fatigue, but as a quiet resolve, the kind that came from staring down shadows and emerging whole. 2 hours blurred into a tense vigil, the Vipers rotating positions with silent precision, their eyes scanning the rearview mirrors for any sign of pursuit. Jax rode close behind Ethan now, his bike's growl a counterpoint to the leader's smoother cadence. The ex-cop had seen networks like this before, threads of corruption weaving through border towns, ensnaring the desperate with promises of easy work that soured into chains. That bandana crew was just the tip, Jax had said earlier, his voice low over the wind during a quick fuel stop. Vance reports to someone higher, maybe a fixer with ties to the old routes we patrolled back in the day. Ethan had nodded, the words stirring memories of checkpoints in foreign sands, where loyalty meant the difference between survival and betrayal. Harlan's garage, with its innocent fixes for weary truckers, had unwittingly become a node in that web, and now the vipers were entangled too. The safe house emerged from the heat shimmer like a mirage made real, a nondescript ranch-style building on the outskirts of a sleepy crossroads called Willow Bend, its facade weathered by years of wind and neglect. To outsiders, it was just another mechanic's outpost, tools scattered in the yard like forgotten relics, but to the iron vipers, it was sanctuary. A Viper chapter hub, stocked with spare parts, medical kits, and encrypted lines to allies who'd traded badges for the open road. Ethan signaled the pull-off with a gloved fist, the convoy slowing in a synchronized dance, engines fading to murmurs as they rolled into the gravel lot. Dust settled slowly, veiling the air in a golden haze as the riders dismounted, their boots crunching in unison. Harlan eased the sedan to a stop, killing the engine with a sigh that mirrored his own exhaustion. Lily stirred, rubbing her eyes as Maria approached, offering a gentle hand to help her out. "We're safe here, little one," the nurse said, her voice a soothing current amid the settling quiet. The girl nodded, glancing up at the house with wide-eyed curiosity, the bear dangling from one arm. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the scent of aged wood and fresh-brewed tea from a pot left simmering on the stove. Samuel and Tyler set to work securing the perimeter, checking locks, scanning the horizon with binoculars, while the rest gathered in the main room, a space cluttered with maps pinned to walls and shelves lined with well-worn helmets. Ethan guided Harlan to a worn leather couch, the mechanic sinking into it with a wince, traces of the night's ordeal still shadowing his features. "This place, it's like stepping back into the old days," Harlan murmured, his eyes tracing the Viper insignia carved into a beam overhead. Ethan pulled up a chair, the wood creaking under his weight, and leaned forward, elbows on knees. The scar on his jaw caught the light from a nearby window, a silver thread against his skin. "It is. Built it after the discharge, somewhere to ride to when the ghosts got loud." He paused, the admission hanging between them, a bridge over the years of silence. Harlan's promise had pulled Ethan from his isolation, but now, in this haven, Ethan saw his own redemption mirrored back. A chance to be the brother he'd vowed to be, not just in words, but in the quiet acts that bound them. Maria tended to Harlan's wounds in the adjoining kitchen, her hands efficient as she cleaned and bandaged with supplies from a well-stocked cabinet. Lily watched from a stool, her small fingers tracing patterns on the countertop, the innocence in her gaze a stark contrast to the gravity of the room. Jax unrolled a map on the table, marking the routes with a steady hand, lines snaking from Dusthaven south to the border, intersecting with whispers of safe passages for illicit cargo. "The bad boxes Lily mentioned," he said, his voice measured, "could be anything from contraband to worse. Harlan, you ever see manifests? Names that didn't fit?" Harlan shook his head, frustration etching deeper lines on his face. "Just sealed crates, heavy ones. I fixed the rigs, kept my head down. Thought it was over when I said no to that last run." His eyes flicked to Lily, softening with a father's fierce protectiveness. The girl slid off the stool, padding over to him, and he pulled her close. The gesture, a silent vow of his own. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like impatient fingers, as if the desert itself sensed the gathering storm. Ethan stood, pacing to the map, his mind piecing together the puzzle. This wasn't just about one debt. It was a rot eating at the edges of communities like Willow Bend and Dusthaven, where honest folk like Harlan paid the price for looking away too long. As evening fell, painting the sky in strokes of deep indigo, the crew settled into watch rotations. Tyler tinkered with a radio in the corner, tuning into static-laced frequencies for any chatter from the south. Samuel shared stories by the fire pit in the yard, tales of rides that turned the tide, not with force, but with the unyielding stand of chosen kin, drawing quiet laughs from the group. Ethan joined Harlan on the porch, the two men nursing mugs of black coffee, the steam curling like unspoken thoughts. "I let the years slip," Harlan admitted, his voice rough against the night's hush. "After the army, life just ground me down. But you riding in? That reminded me what honor feels like." Ethan met his gaze. The weight of their shared past a comfort now, not a chain. "Promises don't expire, brother. They wait." The words carried the essence of their bond, forged in fire and revived on the road. Lily emerged then, blanket draped over her shoulders, and climbed onto the step between them, her presence weaving them tighter. Maria watched from the door, a soft smile breaking through her vigilance, the nurse's heart recognizing the healing in these fragile reconnections. But peace was fleeting. Jax burst from the house, phone in hand, his face taut. "Word from a contact. Vance's bosses are mobilizing. They know we're here, piecing it together. Come dawn, they'll hit the roads, trying to cut us off before we can spread the truth." The air thickened, the wind carrying a chill that seeped through leather. Ethan rose, his crew gathering like shadows drawn to light, their eyes reflecting the fire of resolve. This safe house was a pause, not an end. The real ride lay ahead, a test of loyalty against the encroaching dark. As stars pricked the sky, Ethan felt the pull of the horizon, the promise expanding to encompass not just Harlan and Lily, but the soul of the road itself, a legacy of quiet courage ready to burn bright. The stars wheeled overhead like distant sentinels as the Willowbend safe house settled into the velvet hush of night, the wind whispering secrets through the scrub oaks that flanked the property. Ethan stood on the porch, his silhouette etched against the faint glow from the windows, the mug of coffee long gone cold in his grip. The crew's murmurs filtered out from the main room, Jax plotting routes on the map, Maria sorting supplies with quiet efficiency, Samuel and Tyler reinforcing the gates with chains that clinked like solemn vows. Harlan sat beside him, Lily dozing against his chest, her breaths a soft counterpoint to the tension coiling in the air. The desert night carried the crisp bite of impending rain, mingling with the earthy scent of the fire pit's dying embers, a reminder that even in stillness, change brewed. Jax's warning echoed in Ethan's mind, sharpening his focus like a blade honed on the road's endless grind. The smuggler's network wasn't a loose knot. It was a noose, tightening around towns like Dusthaven, squeezing out the light of honest lives. Vance's bosses, faceless men in shadowed boardrooms or hidden bunkers, had built an empire on silence, buying off sheriffs with whispers and threats, turning borders into veins for their poison. Harlan's refusal had been a spark, and now the Viper's intervention fanned it into a flame they couldn't ignore. Ethan glanced at his old friend, the mechanic's face illuminated by the porch light, lines of weariness etched deeper than the scars from their army days. "We expose them," Ethan said, his voice low and resolute, carrying the weight of promises layered like dust on leather. "Not with guns, but with the truth. Get word to the right ears, folks who still believe in justice without a price tag." Harlan nodded, his arm tightening around Lily, the girl's warmth an anchor against the chill. "For her, for all the ones they break." The words hung between them, a pact renewed under the indifferent stars. Inside, the crew gathered around the table, the map now a battlefield of marked lines and circled points, routes snaking south to the border, intersecting with way stations Harlan had unwittingly serviced. Jax's contacts, remnants of his badge days, were the key. A journalist in a nearby city who'd traded headlines for hidden stories, a retired marshal with a grudge against the corruption that had soured his career. Maria contributed too, her nurses' network a web of quiet observers, doctors and aid workers who'd seen the human cost of those bad boxes, lives shattered by the cargo's hidden toll. As midnight deepened, the first drops of rain pattered on the tin roof, a rhythmic drum that masked the distant rumble growing from the south. Ethan felt it before he heard it, the vibration through the porch boards, engines approaching like a predator's prowl. He set the mug down, signaling the crew with a sharp whistle that cut through the night. Bikes sprang to life in the yard, headlights piercing the downpour like accusatory fingers, casting the rain in shimmering veils. The smugglers had come faster than expected, a convoy of 4 trucks and a dozen bikes, their silhouettes hulking against the lightning-flashed horizon. No subtlety this time. They aimed to overwhelm, to drag Harlan back into the web and scatter the vipers like chaff. The lead truck braked hard at the gate, water sluicing off its hood as doors flew open. Figures emerged, rain-slicked and shouting orders, their voices muffled by the storm, but laced with fury. At their head was a new face, a tall man in a long coat, his features gaunt under a wide-brimmed hat the architect Vance had hinted at. He called himself Reyes, though names meant little in these shadows. Power did. "Hand over the mechanic and the girl," he demanded, his tone slicing through the rain like a cold blade. "Or this haven burns with you in it." His men fanned out, weapons glinting wetly, but hesitation flickered in their stances, the rain turning the ground to mud, the Viper's unified front a wall that didn't waver. Ethan stepped forward, rain streaming down his face, mingling with the salt of old tears unwept. His crew flanked him, 52 strong, now swelled by Harlan's quiet resolve, their vests darkened by the deluge, but their eyes burning clear. Lily peered from the doorway, Harlan's hand over her eyes, but she peeked through, her whisper lost to the thunder. "Uncle Ethan." It fueled him, that fragile trust, echoing the promise that had started this ride. No charges, no retreat. Ethan raised his voice over the storm, steady as the road beneath his boots. "Your web ends tonight. We've got names, routes, witnesses. The journalists already typing. Your business hits the wires by dawn. Walk away, Reyes. Save what's left of your soul." Lightning cracked, illuminating the doubt rippling through the smugglers' ranks. Jax had made the calls during the rain's onset, encrypted lines buzzing with confirmations. The story was breaking, threads unraveling from the capital down. Reyes's gaunt face twisted, water dripping from his hat like melting resolve. He'd built his empire on fear, but here stood men and women who'd faced worse, flames in foreign lands, losses that scarred deeper than skin, and emerged bound by choice, not chains. One of his own men stepped back, muttering about warrants and fallout, the ethical fracture widening. Maria's voice joined from the porch, calm and piercing. "We've seen what your cargo does to families. Ends here." The storm peaked, thunder rolling like applause for the turning tide. Reyes scanned the faces before him, the unyielding loyalty, the quiet power of integrity, and saw his reflection. A man chasing shadows while these riders claimed the light. He spat into the mud, signaling retreat with a curt wave. Engines revved in reverse, and trucks and bikes peeling away into the night, swallowed by the rain's curtain. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just the poetic justice of truth prevailing, a moral victory etched in the downpour. As the rumble faded, the Vipers exhaled collectively, rain easing to a drizzle that washed the tension from the air. Ethan turned to Harlan, clasping his forearm in the grip of brothers. "It's done." The mechanic's eyes shone, gratitude mingling with redemption's glow. Lily ran out then, splashing through puddles to hug Ethan's leg, her laughter a balm brighter than the breaking clouds. The crew gathered, sharing nods and quiet words. The family chosen expanding under the clearing sky, stars re-emerging like promises kept. Dawn broke soft over Willow Bend, gilding the wet earth in gold, the safe house standing sentinel to a new beginning. Ethan watched Harlan and Lily load the sedan, headed for a fresh start in a distant town far from the border's grasp. The Vipers would ride with them part way, then scatter to their chapters, carrying the story like a badge. Ethan's scar felt lighter, the ghosts of his past yielding to this legacy, of honor reclaimed, loyalty's quiet roar. The road called once more, not for escape, but for guardianship, a vow eternal in the hum of engines and the bond of kin forged anew. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable promises and chosen family. If these tales of redemption touch your heart, hit that subscribe button and join us for more. Your support keeps the stories rolling.